Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Mind Body Soul Transformation Podcast. I am excited to be back. I was unsure what we were going to be discussing this week until an idea just dropped in yesterday morning as I was reflecting on the evening before. And this week's topic is all around the idea of expectations. And it's interesting because I think as we work through today's podcast, I too am going to be reflecting on my own understanding, experience, comfort with, and willingness to look at my own expectations. Now, I will share a little bit about why this has come up as a topic for me and why I think this popped in for me as something that we need to discuss, and a lot around the opportunities, as with all things, that are found within looking at our expectations and thinking about how they affect our day-to-day experience. And so the reason this popped in for me quite strongly is that last night, whilst doing the bedtime routine, which every parent will understand has the days where that goes well and the days where that does not go well, I found myself getting just really frustrated that things weren't going to plan, that we were behind schedule, that my daughter wasn't getting to sleep in time at the time that I thought she needed to get to sleep to get a good enough rest for the following day, which was a school day. And that didn't help. Me getting frustrated helped nothing. And thankfully I was able to manage those emotions within myself that she didn't pick up on those, or at least verbalize that she'd picked up on those. But I knew it wasn't helping me. I knew it wasn't, my energy then wasn't helping calm her and get her in a peaceful state to help her get to sleep. And that's a really small example of how having expectations around things can actually impact our ability to just be in a moment and let it flow how it needs to flow. You know, when it comes to the bedtime routine, I have this idea that we need to be in bed by a certain time. We need to have read our stories, and ideally she needs to be asleep by a certain time. And working back from all of those, there's these set times that we need to have had dinner by, had a bath by, so on and so forth. And so night times can become, because of the structure in my mind I've got around it, they can become really stressful, definitely not flowy, and really kind of pushy. Kind of a lot of resistance can pop up, because if we're not on track, then it's like, oh, I need you to eat your dinner. Okay, reminding you need to eat your dinner. Please eat your dinner. It's time to get in the bath. Please get in the bath. Mum, I want to play with you in the bath. Mum doesn't have time to play with you in the bath because I've got to do X, Y, and Z before we get out of the bath and dry your hair and do all of those things. And each of those expectations around how I think that needs to look means there is a chance, particularly in a relationship point of view, but even with ourselves, for the situation not to meet those expectations. And that's where we're going today. Where can expectations help us? Because I do think there are really valid and realistic expectations that we can have in our life that can help drive us forward and push us and motivate us and create healthy relationships. And I think maybe we land in this space more often than not. And there can be expectations that are either unrealistic or just aren't helpful, and maybe aren't actually grounded in what we need at all. Maybe there's expectations that are grounded in what society expects from us, what the people around us expect from us, what our workplaces and our colleagues expect from us. And how can we communicate around those? How can we assess those? How can we look at our expectations and just allow us to let go of the grip of how we think things need to be, and to see what happens. You know, again, this fits all in with this idea of the unknown, a space where we as humans feel really uncomfortable. The unknown of what could this situation, what could this moment, what could this experience look like if I just let go of the idea of how I expect it to look? How could this thing that's showing up for me look like if I let go of how I'm expecting it to look like? And so that's where we're going. That was a big, long intro, but hopefully it sets the scene for what I want to talk about. So when we look at expectations, I think we can ground this conversation in two separate areas to really help us dive into this idea. The first is our expectations around ourselves. That's both our expectations in terms of how we show up day to day, how we show up in particular moments, but also the expectations we have of ourselves, of what we are going to achieve or what we're going to do. That's a big one. I think there's a lot of fodder just in that space for us to really look at, examine for ourselves, and question. Are those expectations helping us, or are they actually holding us back from experiencing what our lives and the world has to offer us? And then the other one, which is a big one that I know we're all going to resonate with and be able to reflect on how it has affected our relationships, is our expectations within relationships. And that is our professional relationships, it is our friendships, and of course it is our romantic relationships. And I think even just saying that, each of you will be able to think of a time where expectations have negatively affected your relationships, particularly where they haven't been clearly communicated or where they've been unrealistic. So the other thing that I'm going to focus this conversation around, so both in terms of the expectations of ourselves or our relationships, is what opportunity lies within those expectations. Is there an opportunity for us to articulate our expectations more clearly, to allow others to meet them, to allow us to better understand what our expectations are? But more so, for the purpose of this conversation at least, is what is the opportunity for us to examine those expectations and really, really look at them and understand, where has this come from? Is this an expectation that genuinely aligns with what I want or what I expect to experience? Is this an expectation that I have internalized from messaging or from people outside of me? And are these aligned with the life and the experience that I really want? Are these helping me? Are these helping me maintain positive relationships with those around me? Are these helping me maintain positive relationship with myself? Are these helping me to experience all that life has to offer? And after asking those questions, then there is the opportunity to either accept those and articulate those, adjust those as they need to make sure they are in alignment with what we need and what we're expecting, and in alignment with what we can actually ask for within those relationships, or even more powerfully, possibly, to let go of those expectations, let go of that grip of what we expect things to look like, and just allow what will be to be. So I want to start by just, as I said, looking at our expectations around ourselves. And I have no doubt that the listeners of podcasts just generally are high achieving people that are looking for ways to better and grow themselves and understand the world around them. And by nature of being that kind of personality, guilty as charged, have really high expectations of ourselves. You know, we hold ourselves to a high standard, and that's powerful. I'm really cautious in having these conversations of bad-mouthing expectations, because the reality is I come from a background where I've always looked at expectations as something that is really positive, really powerful, allows us to push ourselves forward, to set goals, to hold ourselves to the standard that we expect of ourselves. And honestly, probably I've looked at it as a way to set my expectations in relationships to make sure they are healthy, to make sure I have boundaries within those relationships. So with all that said, all of that is very true. Expectations have power. They have power to propel us forward. They have power to improve our lives and our experiences. And what is equally true is they have the power to hold us back. And that is where I really want to focus this conversation. So in terms of our expectations of ourselves, you know, it's probably worth taking the time to sit down and reflect on, to journal, to write down, to ponder what they are for yourselves. What are the expectations that you have for yourself? Both just as it relates to yourself, as how you show up in the world, but also how you show up with others. and also how you show up in the things that you do. And you know, that example the other night of the bedtime was a classic example of expectations I had that just meant I wasn't able to enjoy what should be a really precious time. You know, I've got an hour or two of just cuddle snuggle time each night that I get to do bedtime. And rather than just be in that moment, rather than just enjoy, rather than give my daughter the space to have the conversation that she wants to have with me as we're going to bed, I'm like, we can't talk about that right now because I need you to go to sleep. And there's a to and fro there, but I think that's a good example of how that was holding me back, and my frustration of having that expectation and the situation not meeting that expectation was holding me back from enjoying the moment. And I think that is what comes up a lot of the time when our expectations are not met. We get frustrated, we get upset, we get hurt. And particularly when they're around ourselves, I think it is that frustration, like, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. That's not what I wanted to say. That's not how I wanted this to go. That's not how I wanted to show up in that situation. And there's an opportunity for reflection in there, both in terms of how could I do this differently next time? But part of that might be, how can I let go of that idea of how that was meant to go? What I was meant to say, what I was meant to do in that moment, what I was meant to achieve when doing that thing. And just be open and in the flow of experiencing the moment for what it is, and therefore being open to the blessings that might come out of that moment. I think when it comes to expectations, a lot of the time that idea, whilst yes, they can be really positive, is actually much more grounded in us wanting to control a situation, to control how something goes, to control the ability of something to leave us vulnerable, to leave us open to being hurt, to leave us open to things that don't align with what our ego is trying to protect us from. And you can start to see that as we work through these podcast episodes, all of this is so intricately linked. And so if we think about that in terms of when we're analysing what those expectations are that you've just reflected on for yourself, which of those are truly grounded in expectations that you need to live a life that's in alignment with what you want out of this life, what you're here for, and those two things are possibly different things, and which are all grounded in us trying to control a situation, to trying to understand a situation, to trying to put some structure and systems around a situation that maybe have no place being there, maybe are holding us back. How can we let go of that tight grip that we're holding on to how something's meant to be, to allow it to be different, to allow something to show up in a completely different way that you could have never ever even imagined? Because that's the other thing. We can miss opportunities, we can miss blessings, we can miss things that are meant for us because we're stuck in this idea of what this is meant to look like when something shows up for us. What it is meant to look like when we receive a job offer, what it is meant to look like when someone comes into our path that's meant to be on our path, what it is meant to look like when I turn up as a podcaster, what it's meant to look like when I turn up as a leader, what it's meant to look like when I turn up as a mother. Can I let go of that grip I have on that need of control, of presenting myself, that ego-driven need to control the outcome, to control others' perceptions of me, to control the situation, and just trust in myself that it will play out how it's meant to. And that won't always be how I want it to. That won't always be in a way that necessarily brings me what I wanted out of that situation, but it probably will be in a way that brings me what I need out of that situation. And again, coming back to that quote that I've now referenced a couple of times, the universe won't give us what we want, but it will bring us what we need. And that idea of the universe is there, it's got us our back, it has an idea of a plan for us. If we're just willing to be open and to let that plan play out, then that plan will be full of abundance and of exactly what we need in this life, to learn what we need to learn, to heal what we need to heal, and to have the impact in every way possible that we're here to have, as well as to just enjoy life. And I'm saying all this again as someone that's not perfect at this. I've just alluded to the idea that I've had a really positive relationship with expectations. So even to start to view it from this other angle of how can I let go of the expectations I have of myself, the expectations I have of others in some areas, is challenging for me because I also like control. And a phrase that's helping me with this, at least in terms of being open to what's coming in for me in this life, is something that I've heard recently. And it's this idea of being open to this, that expectation I have of how this might show up, or better. Because the reality is I probably can't imagine what that better could be. But if I'm not open to it, I'm not open to receiving it. I'm not going to be able to receive what that better is. So I need to try and let go. We need to try and let go of what we think things will look like. And just be open to the idea of, yes, I have a goal. Yes, I have a vision of what I want this to look like, whatever it is. But let go of that grip, of that control over what exactly that has to look like, and go, I want this or better. Because that still allows us to be striving for something, to be looking for something. But it makes us much more open to be receiving that in a way that we maybe can't imagine, in a way that the universe needs us to receive it, but we're not thinking about because of our experiences, because it's outside the realm of anything that we could even comprehend at this point in time. I think this is easier said than done, firstly, but it's also easier said and done with that faith in the unknown, with that trust that the universe will bring us what we need, that we can let go of control and trust and have faith that what is meant for us will not pass us by. And that's something that I'm really trying to ground myself in, even in the decisions and the things I have navigated and am pursuing currently. I have to have faith that I am on the right path. I have to have faith in my intuition. I have to have a belief in that there's something bigger than me out there that's helping me on this, and a hope for the future that I can't even imagine at this point in time. Because if I didn't have all of those things, then I'd be back in my expectations that society might have put on me. I wouldn't be making these challenging decisions. I wouldn't be putting myself outside my comfort zone. I'd be exactly that. I'd be comfortable. I'd be doing what's expected of me from society. So I have actually had to examine my own expectations and look at, are those expectations that are aligned with me or not? And my intuition has helped me a lot in that space. So in terms of our expectations of ourselves, that's all in how we show up on a day-to-day, and I've just given some examples of that in terms of the different hats we wear across a day, the way we interact with people, but also the expectations we have around ourselves when we're doing particular things. And I'm going to give just some little examples of this to help ground this in, and then we can look at relationships, which I think hold some much bigger, more challenging examples of how relationships can really hold us back. Just this week, and again, this is why this topic's come up for me, I've already mentioned how my evenings have gone and how I've seen that having expectations around how that's meant to go has led to frustration, has led to me not enjoying moments that are precious that I will never get back. Another beautiful example where I probably let go of expectations much more gracefully than I've done in the evenings this week is on the weekend I followed my intuition and went for a run in the Gold Coast hinterland, which was the first time I'd been down there. I've been looking at 2 different courses to do and decided I actually had enough time if I was running to do both loops together. So I was going to do a 28-kilometre trail run. Never been down there, hadn't run the trails before. So went in blind, not knowing quite what to expect, both in terms of elevation or the technicality of the trails, which can slow me down because I'm not a strong technical runner. And so I've driven an hour and a half, beautiful, stunning drive. That alone probably filled my cup enough that I didn't need to go on the run. But I did start the run and it was the most stunning trail I've ever run on, that's for sure. Waterfalls galore. But the trail was a lot more technical, a lot more muddy than I was expecting, and also just more beautiful than I was expecting. So that in itself made me want to just constantly stop and take in the beauty that I was surrounded by, which meant that my trail run I'd set out to do, the 28 kilometers, the time on my legs that I'd set out to do as part of my training plan, kind of wasn't going to happen. You know, I got lost a couple of times. I was walking a lot. I was taking photos. 14 kilometers or something of the trail took me nearly 3 hours because it just all of those things. And so I knew, because I had a time that I needed to be back by that afternoon, that I wasn't going to get through the 28 kilometers in time to make it back to do what I needed to do. And so I just had to let go. I had to let go of the expectation that, yes, that was a training run. Yes, I've got a race coming up in a couple of months and I really needed time on my legs, but I was getting time on my legs. It just was walking time, not running time. I had to let go of the distance that I'd set out to achieve, and I ended up doing 10 kilometers less than I had planned. And I had to let go of the idea I had to run the course because I was getting different benefits from just being out there, walking the course, climbing the hills. You know, my legs are sore today, regardless of whether it was 28 Ks running or 19 Ks of mostly walking. And so I was able to just let go of the idea of what I'd set out for that to be and be much more just in the moment. And I'm here and where I'm meant to be. This is how it's meant to be, and flow with it. That was an example of letting go of expectations and just being in the moment and enjoying it and flowing with it. And yes, that's minor. We're not talking big, drastic, life-changing, life-altering situations. But as with all of the things we've discussed, by doing that in those moments, it makes it much easier to let go of expectations in the big moments, to flow with things in the big moments, and to enjoy life a little bit more in the big moments. Another example of this, and again, this is something that I fortunately, probably just out of necessity, am better at doing, is, you know, I am an avid runner. I love running, but I've never been a good runner. I've never been a fast runner. I run because I love the way it makes me feel. I love the way it makes my body feel. I love what it does for my mind. I love just getting out there in nature and just being. And so, yes, I sign up for events because I also love events. I also appreciate the motivation that events give me to push the boundaries on what I think is capable for me. But when I sign up for those events, so, let's say an ultramarathon, 80-kilometer ultramarathon, it's really common for people to put expectations around how they're going to perform on race day. I'm going to finish this race either by placing. I'm going to finish this race within this certain time frame. I'm going to finish this race, whatever expectations you might have around it. And what I've learned over my years of triathlon and now ultra racing or running is that more often than not, race day doesn't go to plan. The training runs leading up to race day don't go to plan. And so if you go into those situations with expectations around how that needs to look, when the wheels start to fall off, that's so much harder to keep pushing and keep going. And I see this all the time in people that are more competitive than me. So that just is what it is. There's no point me being competitive because that's not a strength of mine. I'm there to enjoy it. But in the people that are more competitive than me, because they go in with expectations, I can see they just don't enjoy it as much. And I can see when the wheels fall off, when they end up cramping or they end up with an injury on the course, it's much harder to keep pushing because they can see the expectations they had for a situation falling away. And again, not a big life-altering example unless we're talking professional athletes. But it makes me sad when I see that, and I can appreciate where they're coming from. Absolutely. They've put however many countless hours of training in the months leading up to that event into that event going how they want it to go, and it hasn't, and that's devastating. That can be true, as can the power in letting go of those expectations and just going, you know what? Today's not going to go how I thought it was going to go, but that's okay. I'm still here. I can keep pushing on. I can keep pushing through, or maybe I can't. Maybe I have to pull out, but that's the best thing for me to do right now. And I can be okay with that because I can let go of those expectations and know just today wasn't my day. I've enjoyed the journey to get here. I've enjoyed what I've been able to achieve today. I'm grateful for the atmosphere. I'm grateful for the people that have supported me in this journey, the people that have been out on course with me today, all of those things. And I can let go of those expectations and actually then sit in those things that I'm grateful for, then sit in those things that allow me to be in the moment and just appreciate what is. Another one for me, and I touched on this a little bit last week, is this spiritual path right now and, this idea of what that's meant to look like. And this for me is absolutely anchored within the idea of comparison and expecting that because that person's journey is looking like that my journey is meant to look like that their gifts that are opening up that look like that means that when something happens for me that doesn't look the same, that I am behind, I'm a dud, whatever that case might be. And so a really strong example of this for me has been my Reiki training that I completed 2.5 weeks ago. Beautiful, powerful day, super powerful moments with the group that day and in the days that followed, in terms of the visions I was getting, the energy I was feeling moving through my body, the heat within my hands as a result of that practice. And then just something shifted in me. Then I just started to just feel disconnected. I felt like I couldn't even get into a meditation kind of zone, let alone feel the Reiki energy moving through me to do my self-practice and to practice on other people. And that was frustrating. I'll be honest, I was frustrated. I was like, why am I feeling so disconnected? Why isn't this working for me? What's wrong with me? Am I not meant to be doing this? All these questions that you ask yourself when you've got expectations of what this is meant to look like. I didn't, because I'm not a quitter, again, coming back to the races, the lessons I've taken from things like ultra running, I can apply in other parts of my life. So what I did in response to that disconnection that I was feeling is just keep turning up. Every morning I get up at 4:00. I sit, I meditate for 20 to 30 minutes. I do my Reiki session. I then have my cup of coffee and move on with the rest of my morning. That is my morning routine. I'm committed to that. I do that every morning. And I continue to do it, even though I'd sit there for 20 minutes in meditation with my brain just going and going and going and going, and me going, this is not meditation. This is not how it meant to feel like when it's working. This is not working. This is not what I expect. All of those things. Then I do my Reiki session. I'd be like, my hands have no heat in them. I can't even feel my crown chakra opening. I can't feel the energy coming through my body. This is not working. I'm getting frustrated. And that continued for 10 days. 10 days I turned up, kept doing those practices, sticking with my spiritual routine, feeling like it wasn't working, but just committed to not giving up, committed to trying to believe in myself, committed to trying to let go of those expectations of what that was meant to look like. And then last Thursday, afternoon, I came home from work and had my dinner, sat on the lounge, decided I was going to do an evening session. Actually ended up moving to a different place than I would normally do it. I did a meditation. It was a beautiful meditation. I got out of my head, I got into my heart. I had visions come through. Then I did my Reiki session, and for the first time in 10 days, I felt the energy moving through my body. I felt the heat in my hands. I felt the shift in my body. And I was like, this is it. And there's a trap there. I can see there's a trap there in terms of this was my expectation. And yes, now we've met that expectation. And the risk is tomorrow that it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't look the same. And then I'm disappointed and frustrated again. But then what I had to reflect on is, yep, that's what I wanted. That was my expectation. I'm not frustrated tonight. That was beautiful, powerful, all of the things that I needed. What had happened in the last 10 days versus today? What were the opportunities there that I could learn from that might have allowed that day's practice to look differently to the other 10 days? And you know what? It could be as simple as the fact that I didn't give up and I kept turning up and I tried to let go of those expectations, and I was able to turn up on day 10 expecting that it wasn't going to work, expecting that I was going to feel disconnected and trying to be okay with that. And then it came together. Or there was a bunch of other things that happened on that day where I spoke my truth. I had a beautiful creative day full of laughter with people that I love to work with. Probably the combination of all of that just allowed it to come together on that particular day. But the reality and the lesson there for me is my path, my journey in both the spiritual aspect, but also just in life, doesn't need to look like other people's. In fact, it's not going to look like other people's, because it is my path, it is my journey, it is what I am here to do, it is what I am here to experience, and it's what I am here to learn. And that is the power. Letting go of the expectations that I have put on myself based on what other people are experiencing, and just believing, having faith, trusting that if I turn up and do what I need to do, that things are going to fall into place. So yes, I hold myself to the expectation that I will turn up and I will do my meditation and I will do my Reiki practice and I will do whatever else it is that I expect of myself for the standard and for the life that I want to live. But I let go of the expectation of what that looks like. Even of when that needs to be done, where that needs to be done, how long that needs to be, I can just flow with it. So that's just some examples of really small things. Some of the bigger, more challenging things for me recently were the expectations that I have for myself or of my experience or of the things I'm trying to achieve have been opportunities for me to reflect on those expectations. Where have they come from? Are they aligned? Do I need to articulate them better? Do I need to adjust them to match where I am at today in this moment? Or do I just need to let go and just have faith that this or better is going to show up for me if I can just keep in alignment? So please do have a think about, for you, what are the expectations you have of yourself as you find yourself frustrated, upset, angry over the course of the next week or 2 weeks. Just think about what's there, what's underneath that feeling for me. Is it an expectation that I had of myself or I had of others? And is there opportunity there to make some changes, to let go, to adjust, to articulate? Which leads us nicely onto our expectations that we have around our relationships with other people. And this is a big one. This is a minefield, I think. There are probably, not even probably, there would be many relationships that have been ruined by expectations. There are also probably many relationships that don't have strong enough expectations, but I'm going to stay away probably from that area today and focus more on the damage expectations can do to our relationships with others. And so as we talk through this, I just want to think about those different relationships within our life. You know, we've got our professional, our working relationships, we've got our friendships, we've got our romantic relationships, and of course we've got our family relationships. So across every aspect of our life, there is the potential for expectations to show up in a way that can damage those connections, that can damage those relationships, that can end relationships that could have survived had it not been for those expectations showing up in the way that they did, if that was the healthiest and highest path forward for those relationships. So maybe let's start at the workplace, because I think that's the easiest place to start, probably. You know, all of us will have had an experience of being frustrated at work, frustrated at the actions of others at work that just didn't make sense to us, that weren't aligned with our values, possibly, that weren't aligned with what we think the expectations are within a workplace of how to behave, of what that person's meant to do, of how someone's going to show up. And expectations are important within a workplace. You know, as a leader, I'm not here to say that we shouldn't have very clear expectations of what we expect of each other in terms of our behaviour and our professionalism and how we show up in the workplace and the work we do within the workplace. Again, there is a difference between productive expectations, where it is in the greater good of that relationship, the greater good of the group, to have expectations clearly articulated. Point number one, when we're talking about relationships and expectations, is have these expectations being clearly articulated. So if they're valid expectations, they're aligned with what is the greater good of that group or that relationship, key there is to clearly articulate them and to be on the same page as each other. Because if you're not, that's where the tension's going to pop up. That's where the frustration's going to pop up. That's when others are not going to meet your expectations, because they don't know what they are. They don't know what boundaries they're working within. They don't know what you were expecting of them. So clearly articulated expectations within a workplace, within any form of relationship, is really important. The other side of that, though, is the same kind of questions we're asking before. So is this a valid expectation, and have we clearly articulated it? Great. Is this an expectation that we need to re-examine? Where has this expectation come from? Is this just, we're no longer talking about group expectations, is this just an expectation I have of how you show up in the workplace because that's how I show up? Is this an expectation that I have of how you show up in the workplace or what you do in the workplace because that's what my values tell me we're meant to do? Is this an expectation that I have of how you show up in the workplace because that's how I used to show up in the workplace when I used to do that job? And those questions are important, because once you're able to identify where this expectation has come from, it allows us to better examine its validity. You know, all of those things that I just said. My values, unless my values are completely aligned with the workplace values, maybe me imposing my values on you isn't fair. Yes, it probably means that you and I are going to struggle from a relationship point of view if our values aren't in alignment, but also you're not going to know that unless I've articulated that. Me having expectations on how you do your job because of how I expect you to do your job, or how I used to do my job, or how I currently do my job, possibly unfair. And I struggle with this a lot. I think we all do, because we can all look at our own experiences and go, well, I showed up like that, so why can't that person show up like that? I show up like this, why can't that person show up like this? But we're different people. We're on different journeys again. So just allowing ourselves to take that step back and examine that and ask those questions is important, is helpful. And possibly having a conversation with that other person around that. You know, I've been getting really frustrated lately about this happening. I can see where that's coming from my point of view, but my perspective still might be that within this context, we should be doing things like this. I'd really love to hear your perspective on that. And just being really open and vulnerable in that relationship to better understand where they're coming from. Can we reset? Can we adjust that expectation so that either we've clearly articulated it, so we're both on the same page, or we've adjusted it to align with both sides of the equation, both sides of the expectations, to align our expectations. Or, and this is the trap and this is the hard part to do we just need to let go of that expectation and just trust that if that person is there doing what they're doing, assuming positive intent, they're doing what they think needs to be done. And unless you're going to take over their job for them, take over the whatever for them, maybe your opinion about how they're doing something or what they're not doing is not important. Maybe it doesn't change the overall outcome. Maybe their approach to something is just different, and that's fine because it's working. It's not hurting anyone except for your expectations and your frustrations. So, same questions again. Do we need to articulate their expectation more clearly? Do we need to adjust our expectation and actually examine where it's come from? And maybe again, then back to articulating that expectation. Or probably more often than not, and this would, I suspect, relieve a lot of workplace conflicts, do we just need to let go of that expectation? And those that know me will know, again, I'm not talking about the things that hold us to high standards. I'm not talking about the expectations we have for ourselves on how we show up and the brilliant work that we do. I'm talking about those little things on a day-to-day, and we're all guilty of this, where we're just like, oh, why did that person do that? I'm frustrated that this happened. Why didn't that person come talk to me about this? Why? That are just coming from our expectations of how something should be, and examining those and looking for opportunities to just let what will be, unless we need to step in and do some of that other work around those expectations. I think another huge opportunity for this, and this has been big for probably every person that I've known that has gone through parenthood, is exactly that, how we turn up as parents. We all, from that very first moment that we're either thinking about having kids or have conceived our first child, go into that journey with expectations of what that's going to look like for us, of how we are going to be as parents, of how we are going to do things the same or differently to those around us, to our experience as a child. And parenthood is humbling. Parenthood is humbling for all of us and our expectations, because it just doesn't go the way we ever thought it was going to go. And I've had countless conversations around this with expecting parents, both before I had my daughter and afterwards, around these ideas that we go, oh, well, you know, this is going to look like this for me, or my child's not going to have sugar, or my child's not going to have screen time, and so on and so forth. The little things, the big things, the journeys are different. And I only have one child, but I suspect even the journey between your relationship with one child versus the other is different. And having those expectations so firmly set makes that challenging to navigate. So again, that opportunity within those family relationships, both as parents, with other family members, where are your expectations showing up in a way that is not helpful to that relationship? Are your expectations around other people's behaviors letting you get hurt? Is there a need to clearly articulate those expectations so that you've set those boundaries and you've very clearly set the expectations around what you will tolerate and what you won't tolerate, and then be willing to walk away from it should that person continue to behave outside of those expectations? And again, more often than not, where are the opportunities to examine those expectations? Again, are they actually expectations that are aligned with you? Are they expectations that have come from society, that have come from other people? Have they come from the other side of that relationship? Is there a conversation that needs to be had there to adjust those expectations? Or is there an opportunity to just let go of the expectations and let that relationship flow? Let your time with that person and your connection with that person just grow and develop how it's meant to, or fade away how it's meant to. With your kids, they're their own personalities, and we get into this relationship with them before we know what their personality is. We come in with some really strong expectations around what our relationship with them is going to look like, possibly. But they're their own person. And not only are they their own person, but they're growing into their own person. They're learning more and more each day who that person is. And they're setting their own expectations around what they expect from your relationship with them. So continuing to navigate with them every day, every week, every year, on how do I need to show up as a parent to you at this stage of your life? And what are my expectations around your behavior or how you're showing up as a kid that isn't helping our relationship? How do I let you be you, find you, and support you in doing that? And often that requires me letting go of the expectations of what I think you should be, should behave like, should do. And then just lastly is our romantic relationships. And I was having a think about this and the way it's shown up for me in all of my romantic relationships. I think we're all guilty of this, and I'm not sure if this is particularly common in the female aspect of a relationship, but this idea that even when we first meet someone or have this idea of a relationship with someone that we maybe even hardly know, or that we haven't been in that kind of relationship with before, we have a tendency to create this fantasy version of what that relationship's going to look like, what that person will be like in a relationship, like this dream version of a relationship that's not grounded in any reality or even any of our experiences of that person, of putting that person on a pedestal that they are never going to be able to step up to. So there's that, even from the early days of those romantic relationships in particular, of what are the expectations I've put around this person that is unfair, that isn't realistic, that is setting us up for failure. So big one there. Are there expectations for this romantic relationship that I need to articulate early on? That's very valid. There absolutely probably should be expectations within all relationships about how you're going to treat each other from a place of respect and love. No brainer. But what are the other expectations around how that person shows up? And either have you articulated your wants and needs in that regard, or do you need to examine those and question, are these aligned with what I need? Are these actually coming from the romance book that I read, the TV shows I've been watching, the fantasy that I read about romantic relationships? Are these coming from what society expect a romantic relationship to look like? And do I need to let go of these? What is there for me to just be able to be in this and let this develop and grow, just like we were talking about with our children before? Let this relationship with this person develop and grow how it's meant to, and to turn into the natural beauty of what's meant to happen here in this connection. And avoid the frustration, avoid the hurt, avoid the pain that comes with unmet expectations that either weren't aligned or realistic to begin with. And then as we move through our relationships, I think there is a lot of expectations that come into a relationship, particularly the later stages of a relationship. The idea of when we're meant to get engaged, when we're meant to get married, what that marriage is meant to look like, when we're meant to have kids, when we're meant to buy a house, when we're meant to do X, Y, and Z because society expects that a married couple's life looks like that. How is that showing up for you in your relationship right now in a way that isn't in alignment with what you want out of life? And probably ask that question around parenthood too, actually, please, because I think we all know that the current systems and structures that we're trying to put parenthood into are not working. We do not have the community around us that we're meant to have, and it is breaking people, mothers in particular, but not just mothers. And so ask these questions and see if there's something there within your family dynamics, within the support systems and structures you have around you, to reimagine what it could be. Not because of what society is telling you that it should be, that you should be superwoman and be able to turn up and do all the things, work a full-time job, have hobbies on the side, be a mother that's present 24/7, the impossible dream. Just reimagine it. Reimagine your expectations around that and come back to what you need. And then coming back to romantic relationships, the same. I don't think any of us truly understand, because none of us are having these conversations openly and vulnerably enough, what other people's relationships actually look like behind closed doors. We hear the two extremes of the stories, and there's no doubt there. We see the fantasy version, the social media version of our friends' and families' relationships. But not many of us have had front row tickets to see the reality of a relationship, and then we go into navigating a long-term committed relationship by ourselves with expectations that more often than not have been internalized from messaging outside of ourselves. And so before it gets to the point where your expectations are consistently not being met within that relationship, it's time to have a conversation with that person and think about what both of your expectations are. What are important, aligned, and realistic expectations for that relationship, and articulate them clearly to each other. Be willing to negotiate and adjust them as you navigate your relationship and the dynamic shifting within that. But also be willing to let go and step outside the box and consider alternatives, or consider this or better, or just consider being in and letting that relationship develop and flow and grow, or not grow, naturally. Being willing to, if the time comes, to admit when a relationship is done. To let go of the expectation that 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you said I do and you promised that this would be forever, based on a structure that society tells us is meant to look like. And just be willing to say when it's done. We ended heavy there, but I guess the whole point of this conversation coming up today was for us to be actually willing to examine the expectations we have of ourselves, that society have of us. And that's a big one. And there's lots of big ones. That's those kind of big expectations that put so much pressure on us to be a certain way, to show up in a certain way, to have a certain type of relationship across every part of our life. And I just think we need to start questioning them and adjusting them and just letting go. I think in today's podcast, we've spoken very individualized, very the micro level, these expectations we have around ourselves and our relationships with others. But as with all things that I'm discussing in these podcasts, that can be expanded out to the macro. I think we're having these same realizations that we need to start questioning this stuff on a macro level across the world, and articulating our expectations at that level too, but also adjusting our openness to things being not how we're used to them being, and our openness to this or better. And I'm hoping we're heading for better. So if we can be open to that, if we can all let go of the control of our lives have to look this particular way, the world has to function this particular way, it means we're open to something better. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me again for episode 6 of the podcast. Until next week, please do share what you think of this podcast. Please share some of those expectations that you are examining for yourself, the things that you've taken away from this podcast to have a think about. I would love to know how this is resonating for you all. Please, if you are able to, like this podcast, share with people in your life that might also benefit from some of these topics we're discussing. And I will see you next week. Lots of love and light, everyone. Goodbye.